Alto, Bolivia is a curious place. Vibrant markets, Cholita women adorned in bowler hats, also one of the poorest cities in one of the poorest countries in the Western Hemisphere. 77% of the population is below 24 years of age. 76% are native Aymara and 9% are native Quechua. A city of 1 million people, it's the highest major metropolis in the world at 4,000 meters. Upon arrival in the airport, you're greeted with oxygen tanks to use for those who need it, and coca tea in hotel lobbies to help offset altitude sickness. Due to the significant difference in elevation between the cities of El Alto and La Paz, a cable car system was built and began running in 2014. It's called the Teleférico. It's an engineering marvel that spans 36 kilometers with 1,400 gondola cars, 11 lines, and 26 stations. It's the longest cable car system on the planet, serving the highest administrative capital on the planet. Previously, travel was not only difficult between the two cities, but the cities were very dichotomous and isolated from one another, though in the same metropolitan area. Us and them, haves and have-nots. Part of the rationale in creating the Teleférico was also to break down barriers and stigmas. Experiencing this is very moving, not just literally, but in the sense of having a God's eye view of the vast differences of Bolivian life. People are seeing new worlds within their own that they previously only had heard of. Cultural behaviors become ingrained in people regardless of where we live. Some are life-enhancing, some are life-destroying. On a typical Friday night in El Alto, you can find lineups up and down city blocks of men awaiting their turn to step into one of the many crammed brothels. For the equivalent of $2 Canadian, a trick is had, and the women entrapped in this cycle see between 10 and 60 men per evening. The Cholita women of El Alto have broken many gender and social barriers, yet still so many Bolivian women are trapped in a vicious cycle of prostitution and trafficking in this desperately poor region. What alternatives are there to be had when there are seemingly none? Today we find one such alternative, an organization that exists as a freedom business that fights trafficking and sexual exploitation by offering new and abundant life for Bolivian women. And you can play a part in this incredible social enterprise. All on today's episode of the 6-8 Culture podcast. Welcome to the 6-8 Culture Podcast, an international community where we share stories of transformation and restoration from the inside out, based on justice, kindness, and humility. Come journey with us. I'm your host, Rob McKinley. Today's guest brings us a wealth of cross-cultural experience. Raised in Ethiopia as a daughter of missionaries, she now calls Bolivia her home. She arrived in Bolivia in 2006 to work with the organization Word Made Flesh Bolivia. She finds deep joy in the solace of the mountains of Bolivia along with her husband and 2 daughters. After arriving in Bolivia, she was quickly swept up by a vision for a therapeutic and vocational option for survivors of prostitution and trafficking. In 2010, she was part of the team that founded Sutisana. She's worked in almost every part of the business and is now focusing on making Sutisana a business that can grow and flourish in the future, independently of any one person. I had the privilege of spending a couple of days with Sutisana back in 2017, and their work is a combination of noble, heroic, critical, front lines, and a story that must be told. Such a pleasure to welcome the co-founder and director of Sutisana, Cara Contreras. Welcome to the 6-8 Culture podcast.
Thank you so much, Rob. It's so great to be here.
And it's great to have you here, Cara. I know we've been plotting this for a couple of months now, so it's great that this day has finally arrived. I really appreciate the work that Sutisana does. As I alluded to, I had spent some time with your organization back in 2017 with one of your colleagues, and I was captivated and impressed, to say the least. We'll hear more about Sutisana in a little bit, but let's first start with you. Someone who grew up in Ethiopia and is now living her life in the vibrant country of Bolivia. Can you share with us your beginnings and how your roots have shaped and formed you along the way?
Sure. I grew up as a missionary kid, as you mentioned, in the beautiful country of Ethiopia. I spent most of my childhood kind of in a fairly traditional mission environment. My father started an underground seminary when Ethiopia was still a communist country and no churches or seminaries were allowed to legally operate. My father was able to start a underground secret theological training program for Ethiopian church leaders and see the church grow in spite of the communist persecution in that country. So I was always able to see cutting edge mission work being done and was really inspired by the way in which the kingdom of God could grow through the work of a few people who were just willing to make themselves available to that.
Wow. What part of Ethiopia were you raised in
the capital city of Addis Ababa. It's a beautiful city on the top of a high plateau. So I was raised at about 7,000 feet of altitude. And now in Bolivia, I live at about 12 to 13,000 feet of altitude. So I've made quite a jump, but I think my body was at least a little bit prepared for it.
Yeah, 7,000 feet seems like nothing. I was in Ethiopia last year and just really relished experiencing the culture there. I spent the majority of the time down in Sodo and spent significant time with the denomination of the Kalahewit Church there, which is a huge denomination in Ethiopia, and had a very interesting trip on the way back from Sodo up to Addis. And I was just really amazed at the diversity going between those two cities, and very much predominantly Muslim communities along the way there. Numerous checkpoints, weapons checkpoints. There's a lot of gun smuggling and running. It's a point of entry and release, getting these weapons up to Addis and then smuggled out through there. And Addis itself is such a vibrant city. There was a beautiful chaos there, for lack of a better term. What are some of the things that really stood out to you in Addis growing up?
Well, the food is the best in the world. It's probably what we're going to eat for the rest of eternity in heaven. I can't imagine a more heavenly food than Injera and all its accompaniments, including, of course, the birthplace of coffee and the best coffee in the world.
Right.
So you really can't beat Ethiopia in terms of culinary confections. And like you mentioned, it has one of the biggest open air markets in the entire world. The people of Ethiopia are mostly mountain people, and they have a deep pride in their culture and their history. It's one of the only countries that was never colonized by a European country. But Italy did manage to make it in and mix with the culture. So you have incredible macchiatos, you have wonderful spaghetti, and their influence has kind of shaped Ethiopia to be a fascinating, independent, and very proud nation. The people of Ethiopia don't understand why anyone would ever want to be anything but Ethiopian. And that's something that just shines through the culture and the people there. Rob, do we have time to play a small world game? Who were you with when you went down to Sodo?
I was with Tear Fund Canada, and they partner with an organization there called the Therapeutic Development Association. Just phenomenal work that this organization does. They're the development arm of the Kalahewit Church down there.
Okay, wonderful.
Yeah, just a really great experience, really eye-opening from my travels in Asia and South America, just very different. There's some common social maladies and social triumphs, but very different manifestation of it. The people were just incredibly hospitable, very kind. The two things that I couldn't wrap my head around were the coffee down in the Sodo region. In the rural areas that people drink their coffee is there's
salt
no
and butter.
Well, where I was, there's no cream, there's no anything, and it was chunky, thick granules you would pick out of your teeth afterwards. Now, don't get me wrong, Ethiopian coffee is amongst the best coffee in the world. There are some areas in the rural regions that farmers, to maximize the use of the coffee plant, they have opted to market in coffee leaf tea. And some people love it. I could not get my head around that. It was really tough to swallow.
Quite literally.
Yeah, but just an incredible experience there. I learned so much in Ethiopia. How much time did you spend in Ethiopia, and were you also raised in the States as well?
Most of my childhood was spent in Ethiopia. So I went to an international school until I finished 8th grade. And then I actually went to an international boarding school in Kenya for high school. And I would come back to Ethiopia 3 times a year to spend a month with my family. So I got to spend a lot of time in East Africa, but quite honestly, most of my childhood was in a little bit of a traditional missions bubble. I went to an English-speaking primary school and an English-speaking high school. There wasn't necessarily a lot of incarnational living with the family, with the culture that I was in. And so a lot of that was partially because under the communist government in Ethiopia, for the first part of my life, foreigners were segregated quite intentionally so that we couldn't spread our democratic or capitalist ideas to the population. And so that was quite an intentional move by the government to make sure that we didn't make too much of an impact. But it's very different. The kind of ministry that we do in Bolivia is much more among the people that we are serving among, and not necessarily separated in compounds or in English-speaking schools, etc.
Looking back at it with 2020 hindsight, from your perspective as a kid and for who you are as a parent now, what would you have done the same, and what would you have done differently if you were in the same situation back then with the knowledge that you have now?
Well, my parents were absolutely incredible, and I just adore the family that I grew up in. There was always lively discussions around the dinner table on different political or theological or cultural topics, and I really think that in the circumstances that they were in, they did their best to try to enculturate me to where I was. I was always very proud of being in Africa, very proud of being a missionary kid. I also think that my current choices as an adult were to take all of that bounty of experience and maybe take it one step further. My choice to come down to Bolivia and walk in the red light districts and visit survivors of human trafficking where they worked, that's not something that my parents ever could have chosen for me, but it's definitely something that they were able to prepare me for by understanding some of the nuances of cultural movement and maybe give me that platform to jump a little further into incarnational ministry. Forming friendships among the people that you've come to serve and living maybe a little more shoulder to shoulder with people who are very vulnerable.
So it sounds like your parents were a huge catalyst in propelling you to where you are now down there in Bolivia. Were there any other people in your life that were very formative in your desire to live in the margins and serve people in very vulnerable situations?
In the organization that I'm a part of, Word Made Flesh, there we have a huge library of incredible resources and authors who've dived into the idea of serving the vulnerable of incarnational ministry. Everyone from Mother Teresa to Viv Grigg to Jonathan Bonk, people who just try to push the boundaries a little bit and see if there's maybe a different way to do things than what we've already done, a different way to look at things. Maybe just try things that other people have said aren't necessarily possible, like living as simple as possible in order to better connect with the people who you live among, for example. But I think mainly it was getting down to Bolivia on an internship and serving among amazing people who were down here, both Bolivian and expat, mostly Americans. And that was a very quick intro into the possibilities of how we could maybe make an impact among more vulnerable people. And so that little 4 months that I spent in Bolivia back in 2005 just changed my life completely. I kind of did a 180 and realized that this is what I wanted to be doing. Bolivia almost immediately felt like home, and I was able to pretty much decide that this was where my life was leading me.
Wow. I can understand the sentiment of that. When I experienced Bolivia in 2017, I felt very similar to that. There's just a sense of belonging there. It's such a vibrant and diverse country. But before we get into that, after high school in Ethiopia, or I guess in Kenya, did you make it back to the States first, and that's where you encountered Word Made Flesh?
Yeah, I went to a Christian college in the northwest corner of Arkansas, John Brown University, and the former director of Word Made Flesh came and spoke at my college, and I just felt a real longing for the kind of ministry, the way of doing ministry that was described, the idea of serving from the point of community, serving along with other people, but having that as a base and a support for the way that we reached out and were able to dive into other people's lives. The idea of doing it in a framework of more simplicity and diving into people's brokenness rather maybe than running away from it. All those were pretty revolutionary for me. And when I heard about that kind of new style of doing ministry in the style of what's known as the New Friars, this new monastic movement that desires to go out and live simply among the vulnerable, it was very attractive. It kind of caught my imagination, and it was definitely something that impelled me to look into them after I graduated from college and was teaching middle school English, which was very clearly and very quickly understood to not be my calling, not be my vocation in life. Praise those middle school teachers who are continuing to do all the good that they do, especially now among probably the worst teaching time in all of modern history.
Yeah, but that is a challenging age, that's for sure. Yeah.
I personally find what I do among survivors of trafficking so much easier than that particular calling. So Thank you, teachers.
Yeah. So you found yourself then going down to Bolivia in 2005 and then wanting to return. So you came back to the States and just packed everything up and went back.
Yeah, pretty much. At the time, we thought that we might be founding a coffee shop for survivors of trafficking and prostitution. And so worked at a coffee shop for a few months and tried to see if that was the way that we were going to be able to found a business for these women. But as soon as I could get back, I got back in the middle of 2006, and I was able to integrate into that community and start visiting the red light district almost immediately.
We're listening to Cara Contreras, the co-founder and director of Sutisana, a freedom business which exists to fight human trafficking and commercial exploitation. Stay with us as we hear about Bolivia and the cities of La Paz and El Alto, where Sutisana serves. Speaking of coffee in Bolivia, my all-time favorite coffee shop is located in La Paz.
Típica?
And the name is escaping me right now.
Roaster?
If it comes back to me, I'll let you know. But it was the best experience I've ever had in a coffee shop. Their food, the ambiance, the actual coffee, it was absolutely phenomenal. Wow. Okay, so you landed in La Paz, and is that where you set up camp, or in El Alto where you are now?
So Word Made Flesh Bolivia works in the red light districts of El Alto. El Alto is the poor former slum city of the capital of La Paz. It's at least as large as La Paz, but just kind of continues to grow across this huge high plain of Bolivia and just spreads out for miles and miles and continues to grow as immigrants from the countryside come in and continue to look for better opportunities. And so the red light district of this former slum are known as the biggest, the most dangerous, the poorest, the most vulnerable red light districts of Bolivia. And that's where a lot of victims of human trafficking end up. It's also where a lot of women who have been working in prostitution for decades, it's kind of their last stop before some kind of undignified retirement. And so Word Made Flesh Bolivia feels like that is the most vulnerable of these women who have been caught up in one way or another in this horrendous trade. And so that's where we went. It's where we were told not to go, and that's usually a sign that somebody needs to be there. We've been visiting the red light districts of El Alto and have extended to La Paz now for over almost 20 years.
Wow, that's incredible work. The vibrancy of El Alto was something that hit me like a cold glass of water to the face when your colleague Andrea took us around to some of the parts of El Alto, from just these amazing markets, the people everywhere, the colors, the smells, the sights, and the sounds. And then there was one place that we went to over these railroad tracks. As we walked down there, I just felt such a sense of darkness and oppression. There were these small homes, but set up as businesses for fortune tellers, sacrifices. It's hard to convey in words the experience, but it was very ominous. Can you share a little bit about that community, what that is about?
One of my favorite metaphors of how people feel about El Alto is that right on the edge of El Alto comes across this huge high plain, as I mentioned, and then La Paz dips down into this bowl-like valley. Right on the edge of El Alto, along this kind of cliffside that circles La Paz, there's a big statue of Jesus with his arms stretched out, facing La Paz, as if he was cradling or extending his embrace to the capital city of La Paz. But of course, behind him is the city of El Alto. So this metaphorically, it's almost as if the people who set this up were saying, the grace of Jesus is on La Paz and his back is to El Alto. And there is a sense of spiritual darkness in a lot of places in El Alto. But I believe that is not at all because there is a lack of God's love and work and incredible grace upon the city of El Alto, this vulnerable, growing city. But I believe, though that's the perception, there is actually incredible restoration being done on the earth through ministries, through growing movements that is actually allowing El Alto to be a leader in Bolivia. It's definitely what we hope. It's what we're working towards, that El Alto be a catalyst for positive change.
Yeah. And you can sure see that happening within your organization there. Speaking of your organization, let's chat a little bit about Sutisana. Sutisana offers dignified employment for women who are leaving prostitution and trafficking. When you land on the homepage, the first caption says, "Style your world, empower hers." And then there's an embedded video that I might add is very moving and full of hope, which shows El Alto, Bolivia, where Sutisana is located. The video brings home some sobering statistics. 9 out of 10 Bolivian women are expected to be victims of violence in their lifetime. An estimated 13,000 registered sex workers in El Alto and La Paz alone. Each woman is servicing between 10 and 60 clients per night. The majority of them were victims of force, fraud, or coercion, which falls into the category of trafficking. One woman says, "It's as though I was thrown into a well. I tried and tried, and there was no way to get out." Cara, what does Sutisana mean? And can you give us a run through on the city of El Alto and the work that you do there, how Sutisana is integrated into the community?
Absolutely. I'll start with the origins of Sutisana. One of the first times I visited one of the outlying red light districts with women who maybe were even too old or too vulnerable to even be in the center of these red light districts. I met a wonderful woman named Dora, and I believe she had 5 children, and her husband had left her. She didn't know where else to go, and so she had been prostituting for years, a few decades at that point, in order to feed her 5 children. And she looked me in the eye and she said, "If you give me a job, I will leave tomorrow." And that was just like a punch to the gut, because suddenly it was in my hands. She was saying, "You have the chance to give me hope, and it's up to you to decide whether you take that or not." So our sweet friend Dora was there the first day we opened Sutisana and were able to offer her training. And the name Sutisana means healed name. Sana is Spanish for healed or whole, and Suti is a word in the Aymara indigenous language that's spoken a lot in El Alto, and it means name. The idea is that a lot of the women who work in trafficking situations or in prostitution and sexual exploitation of some kind take on a new name when they enter that lifestyle because they don't want to be known by their real name. It's a facade, it's a mask that they put on. And when they come out of that lifestyle, when they're given an option that is something that's restorative, most often they'll either take on a completely new name or go back to their birth name if they feel a connection to that name. And so the idea of a healed name also speaks to an entire healed identity, the idea of a restorative option that is able to give them a chance to become who they were meant to be and not trapped in exploitation for the rest of their lives. There are many, many women who are trafficked into the brothels or the red light districts who, even if they had a chance to escape a trafficking situation, wouldn't necessarily have other options for employment. So these are women that have often many, many children to feed. They're women who often haven't finished primary school or are semi-literate. They're women who don't have a lot of marketable skills and don't have a lot of other options. We live in one of the poorest countries in South America, and so the economy isn't necessarily thriving to the point where women can get a good job with marketable skills. And so we realized that we needed to create a market. Sutisana is a sewing workshop. We teach women how to sew from the very, very beginning of touching an industrial sewing machine for the first time. And we're able to work them up to become talented and marketable sewers who create export-worthy, beautiful artisanal goods made of wool, leather, cotton, all found right here in Bolivia. Of all types, even clothing. We've made organizational swag. We believe that providing women dignified employment outside of sexual exploitation is the number one way that human trafficking is going to ultimately be put to an end. We believe that if these women are able to have a better, profitable option for them and their families that is stable, that is in a healing environment, that this horror, this slavery that is sexual exploitation and human trafficking won't have a leg to stand on. There's a lot of other issues, of course, the issue of demand, the issue of poverty, the issue of childhood sexual abuse that are horrendous factors in this terrible criminal enterprise that is trafficking and exploitation. But we also believe that business and dignified employment is an opportunity that we can use to make sure that this doesn't happen generationally, that this can stop with these survivors, but also give options to those who are at risk, so that they never end up in this violent cycle.
Yeah. So do you have people approaching Sutisana saying, hey, I want to get out of this. I don't know how to do this. Are you limited by resources, by capacity? What are some of the challenges that happen as you're trying to help reintegrate these women into a life outside of exploitation and abuse?
One of my favorite artisans, her name, I'm going to call her Fiona. She was in a situation where she wanted to get out. She just had no idea how. She got pregnant with her 5th child after being trafficked onto the streets as a teenager and spending 15 years in and out of prostitution with different men. So she was pregnant with her 5th child by the 5th father of her children, and she decided that once and for all she was going to get out. And so she tried to take a job at a bus station serving soup to bus passengers in this grimy station, and she was lugging these huge vats of soup from one side to the other, probably 50 to 60 pounds worth of soup, and serving these customers. And she started having these terrible cramps, and she was scared she was going to lose her baby because it wasn't work for a pregnant woman. And she had heard from one of our other artisans about Sutisana, so she came knocking on our door and asked if there was a job for her. And right at that time we had a need for new artisans, and so we welcomed her in, and she was able to work all through her pregnancy, training in sewing, and then after her pregnancy was able to have a maternity leave and even childcare when she brought her kid back to work and continue working with us. And Fiona has now blossomed into one of our most talented artisans. We're hoping that someday she can actually be our production assistant and help our production coordinator lead the entire workshop of Sutisana. We are so excited to be able to empower these women, take them at whatever skill level or whatever place they are when they enter with us, but then individually focus on how we can allow growth and allow the blossoming of their talents and their abilities and their interests, and allow them to really grow into leadership. We believe that it's through them that there will be a cultural revolution that will ultimately shut down everything that's wrong about sexual exploitation and trafficking.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
Yeah. So yes, Sutisana is a business, and we are subject to the ebbs and flows of market economy.
Yeah.
And so that means that sometimes we don't have space to hire artisans as often as we'd like. Amazingly enough, last year, when economies around the world were crashing, we actually had our best year ever. And this year, we're hoping to add 5 new artisans, between 3 and 5. I'm hoping for 5 to our workforce and be able to provide them with more jobs and more opportunities. And it kind of depends on how sales go, on who is interested in us as a production force for either their orders, or who is willing to change their purchase patterns so that they include more freedom businesses that actually offer freedom rather than take it away from their employees.
Yeah, exactly. And I want to touch on that. But just before we get into that part, I just want to go back to what you were saying about these women almost subversively taking down this order of exploitation. In El Alto on Friday nights, these are called the men's nights out. There are pathological cultural maladies in every society on our planet. They're just manifest in different ways. Are there awareness initiatives and preventative approaches that engage Bolivian men who keep these brothels in business?
No.
Okay. Yeah.
I wish I could tell you something different. Right now, our focus is on the women, but there absolutely need to be organizations or movements that focus on breaking pornography and sexual addictions, and that focus on creating a culture that builds up women and that honors them instead of subjecting them to violence or simply being used. Obviously, that's going to start in every home. It's going to start when there are boys and girls who are raised understanding the dignity of humans and the human body and the human soul. And ultimately, until men are able to value women as people and not objects to be bought, that's not going to happen. But I don't see a lot of movement right now to make that happen.
Okay, that's a good, honest answer, so we can see where the glaring needs are there. So now we can go back to Sutisana here, and you so eloquently said about purchasing decisions that are based on freedom, on emancipation. Going on your website, it's phenomenal. When I was there, I was able to visit the production room and see the quality of the products that these women are producing. It is top-notch, fantastic products. You have things, yeah, I was so impressed. So you have women's handbags, totes, clutch, purses, or whatever they're called. I'm a guy, I'm not. Clothing, jewelries and accessories, wallets. And there's things for men, there's wallets, there's clothing, kids, there's home goods. You look at the prices, and for the quality of these, it's pretty on par for what people would pay at a higher end, decent quality store for some of these things. So what would you say to someone who says, well, I could get something that looks similar at Walmart? What would your response be?
I have certainly gotten things that look similar at Walmart, and there's no condemnation in that. But I think with every dollar that we spend, we cast a vote for the kind of world that we want to live in. That is not my quote. I'm stealing that from someone. But our purchases are one of the main ways that we can change the world. And if we're purchasing from companies that abide under fair trade practices, that look not just for a profit, but look to benefit the people who are involved in that business and benefit the planet that we live in, there are huge changes that can be made by just shifting a few of our dollars to a different source. I'm amazed. I mean, Sutisana, I'm so proud of what we do, and we do a lot of different stuff, but there are hundreds of businesses around the world that have entered these new markets. You can get so many different kind of products, fulfill so many of your needs from businesses that honor people and that honor our planet and that honor a true community cycle of purchase and of economy, rather than global multinational corporations that their one purpose is to make another buck. And so I'm not going to say I'm not going to buy at Walmart. There are still things that I will, but I think every time we can shift our choices just a little bit, we'll start creating movements where those things are valued more, and we'll start making larger cultural shifts to what really matters.
Yeah, absolutely. And, as we've been told, we can't serve both God and money. And I think our most powerful vote, especially in the epoch of time in which we live now, in this global village that we live in, we've heard all the fanfare about the US election recently. We know about elections in so many global South countries where there's chaos and violence in the streets. But our most powerful vote is with our dollar. And
Mm,
if we can ingrain that, especially into the more affluent societies in the West, if we start voting as much with our dollars as we do in the voting booths for political leaders, we will actually see true world transformation. And it will
mm,
happen in a subversive, ground up, organic way in which
mm.
it's really supposed to happen. Cara, can you highlight maybe some of your feature products that people would be interested in looking at and how that goes to support some of the workers and the creators that you have there?
Sure. And I'd like to say I was thinking about Walmart again,
Yeah,
or Amazon, or any of
yeah.
those places. I think also the older I get, the less I buy like a 20 something who's just going to buy something that's going to last a month and then find the next thing that's going to last a month. I think the differences between our products and other feeder businesses is we really do make quality stuff that lasts a long time.
Mm-hmm.
So you could pay for a tote bag at Walmart, or you could buy our leather tote, which is stunning and will last you quite literally a lifetime, and will get better with age because, man, those vegetable tan leathers, they just last forever.
Yeah.
So it's not necessarily spend more money just because you're helping people. It's spend more money for a more quality product. I mean, everyone knows you should buy German or Japanese if you're going to buy kitchen appliances. And I think the same can be true of fashion, of jewelry, and of accessories, and of clothing. You're not just getting a product that helps people, you're getting a product that will serve you. And so we like to say that we want to spread abundant life, not just for our artisans and not just for our staff, but for all of our clients. We believe that our products will actually contribute to a more abundant life than Target or Amazon.
Absolutely. Yeah.
We have beautiful leather products, like you mentioned. We have gifts for men. We're expanding that this year as well. We have dob kits and wallets and coin pouches, but we hope in the future, very quickly in the future, to have more belts and more leather options for men. Of course, our purses, both our wool designed purses and our leather purses, are probably our star product for most people. We have purses that include cowhide, and the wool is very, very unique to Bolivia. We actually design our own wool with a factory. So every purse that includes a wool will be absolutely unique. You won't be able to find anything like it in the market. We also have a few pieces of clothing still hanging around, but mostly our clothing now is going to institutions. For example, Operation Christmas Child. We actually fulfilled a t-shirt order for Operation Christmas Child here in Bolivia last year to include in all of those shoe boxes that go out to kids around the world. And we were able to fulfill that order for Bolivia. So most of our clothing these days goes more towards institutional orders, but we're also open to making any of those orders for people who, for example, want to order, let's say, 50 t-shirts for their youth group or something like that. So there's a lot of options. We have a huge range of products.
What do you use for shipping from there?
We usually ship air freight to our distributor who's in Charlotte, and then she is an amazing woman who ships it out for us.
That's great. Can you highlight maybe a typical day in the life of someone who goes into Sutisana and starts creating these magnificent pieces?
So training for our new artisan usually lasts between 2 and 3 months. And by that time, they'll be able to use all the major industrial sewing machines that they'll need to use. And from then on, it's mostly practice. What any one artisan will be working on day to day completely depends on what the needs are at that time. So for example, last year, we actually managed to produce almost 10,000 pieces of PPE, of personal protective equipment,
Wow.
both for people in Bolivia and for people in the States. And that included biohazard suits, waterproof biohazard suits for police and people who were responding to domestic violence situations here in Bolivia. That was one of our favorite orders ever because we were able to help protect these people from the pandemic while they were also doing good work. We create masks, thousands and thousands of cloth masks for people around Bolivia, and those are on our website too. And then sometimes we are making more pretty things. There might be an artisan who's cutting the leather or trimming the wool or throwing a t-shirt together in about 10 minutes. And there's a lot of laughter. There's usually a lot of music. There's even sometimes some dancing or some Zumba going on.
Wow, that's good.
And yeah, it really is a community. A lot of our artisans tell us that it's their second home, or sometimes in unfortunate situations that they'd rather be at work than at home.
Right.
We don't assume that we're their family and we don't aspire to be their home, but we do want it to be a safe place where they can continue in their healing journey. When it's not pandemic time, we have a lot of potlucks and we celebrate birthdays really big, and hopefully someday we'll have more space for their kids as well so that their kids can be a little closer while they're working.
I had discussed at the very beginning intro of the podcast, explained a bit about the Teleferico. Are some of these women coming from La Paz rather than in El Alto, or are all of your workers at Sutisana from the El Alto area?
Right now, they all live in El Alto or right on the edge of El Alto, right before they dip down into La Paz.
I remembered the name of the coffee place.
What is it called?
It's called HB Bronze Coffee Bar.
Oh, that is the place with one of the most expensive cups of coffee in the world, if I believe, or at least in Bolivia.
It was expensive, and it was an amazing experience. Somewhere that I will definitely go back to when I get to La Paz again. Speaking of La Paz, that is one of my favorite cities in the world. Something just magical about that place. And I think part of it was the Teleferico, how it was built. You can see the broad diversity of the greater La Paz, El Alto area and how it almost brings these communities together. I think it came out in 2014, it started. So you've been there long prior to that. What is the difference between the communities of La Paz and El Alto pre-Teleferico and now that it's in place?
One thing the Teleferico has done is joined the relatively wealthy city of La Paz to the relatively poor city of El Alto. And that has opened up a lot of conversation, some controversy on what it means to be from different socioeconomic levels, but be joined in one large, massive, sprawling twin city. Mm-hmm. And it has certainly created a lot of opportunities, a way of reaching out to both clients and community in a way that ties us a little closer together in a way that I think is a great thing and starts great conversations. But it has been interesting to see the shift and to see the changes now that we can't separate ourselves as much by neighborhood as we could before. Mm-hmm. Is that kind of what you were looking for?
Yeah. Just think it's a great idea. Obviously, because of the topography there, the difference in elevations between the two cities and how difficult it is to get from La Paz to El Alto and back. But with the Teleferico, there's just this connectivity. It's like a wall has been torn down. Mm-hmm. Sociologically, how that has played itself out over the last 7 years. There must be some challenges, but a lot of great triumphs associated with it as well.
I agree. It's going to cause some fascinating shifts in Bolivian culture in the next few decades.
Yeah, because it continues to evolve, doesn't it? They're constantly building on it. Cara, is there anything else that you'd like to share about the challenges and solutions that you're facing with Sutisana right now?
I think one of the things that is maybe different than other forms of outreach or relief and development in terms of business is that it operates as a business. So sometimes, I came into this work with a huge bleeding heart for these women and just wanting the best for them, more of a social work tendency of just diving into their lives and getting to know them and loving them. And they're still some of my favorite people on earth. But when you come to the practical needs and ebb and flow of business, it feels sometimes, or could even look from the outside, a lot more mechanical, a lot more cold. We do attempt efficiency because that brings down our costs. Yeah. And so trying to figure out how to balance those two things. We still want this beautiful, safe, loving community environment for them. And we also want to increase efficiency and bring down costs. and make sure that we are a business that actually makes a profit. And so trying to figure out how those things go together is both fascinating and frustrating work. And luckily, it's not something that we're doing alone. Like I said, there are hundreds of businesses around the world that are dealing with the same issues. It maybe doesn't feel as much of a beautiful story or a happy ending when you're dealing with, how to speed up machines or or any of the other smaller issues that we have to deal with from day to day. But ultimately, I have to remember who I'm doing it for. And so when I get to hang out with the artisans and get to see the changes that this has made in their lives and families and extended families, I can remember why we've tried to join these two sometimes contradictory vocations.
If there's somebody that is wanting to visit Bolivia or is in Bolivia right now and wants to visit your organization, is that a possibility?
Absolutely, though nobody's coming to Bolivia these days with the pandemic.
Right.
But whether it's now or later, our doors, of course, are always open.
We've been listening to Cara Contreras, the co-founder and director of Sutisana. For more information on Sutisana, visit their website at sutisana.com. That's SUTISANA.com. Thanks for sharing your time with the 6-8 Culture podcast, where we share stories of personal transformation that are making our world a more just, kind, and humble place. Join us for our next session of impacting stories with 6-8 Culture. This is Rob McKinley signing out with a reminder for us all to act justly, to be kind, and to walk humbly.